G'day everyone. After playing nothing but the First Descendant over the last week or so, I've realized that it can be relatively difficult for people new to this modding system to understand what stats they should be prioritizing and how to build around them. I know a lot of people will just follow a build guide online, and as such we will be releasing some endgame optimized builds in the coming days. But I know that a lot of people want to make their own builds, and they don't really know where to start. I personally have a few years of Warframe experience under my belt, and the First Descendant system is extremely similar. I remember for the longest time in Warframe not understanding the modding system and being able to optimize and really wrap my head around everything. So I wanted to go through the standard buildcrafting formula and explain each step individually so we can explore the sort of flow of buildcrafting. This video is going to cover all of the basics for figuring out and creating your own builds for each Descendant. In terms of weapons, that'll be a separate video. It follows a similar style and process, but it's a little bit more in-depth and hands-on. Starting off with Descendants, I want to start with Bunny. A hugely popular character at the moment, and for good reason. The first thing we want to do is take a look at our character's base stats. Bunny has high max MP and relatively low survivability. Health and defense are both higher than her shield, so we'll keep that in mind. For general mobbing in hard mode content, what do we want? We're looking primarily for two things: maximum ability uptime and enough survivability to not ever really worry about going down. Once we can successfully tick both of those boxes, we can look towards making our abilities even more powerful through range, duration, etc. Our baseline for ability uptime is focused on making durations longer than cooldowns so that we always have our most useful ability up. This is the case for most characters in the game, Bunny, Glay, Blair, and Ajax being the primary examples. On Bunny here, all we need are a few mods: skill extension, and here I'm using time distribution and focus on electric. Now you could opt for nimble fingers instead of time distribution and focus on electric, however these also give us desirable traits that are just cheaper than standard modding. This also pushes our lightning emission cooldown to just below our duration, giving us theoretically infinite lightning emission as long as we keep moving. Now for survivability, I want to take the time quickly to talk about the advantages of shield, HP, and defense. Shields are weird. If you've played Warframe before, you'll know what I'm about to say, and that's that shields aren't really useful, unless your character specifically uses them in their kit, like Kyle, who incorporates them with his passive. Now, one thing that needs to be tested is the concept of shield gating, and that's where taking damage that breaks your shield or fully depletes it gives you a brief period of invincibility. Now, this is in Warframe, and it seems like it might be in the First Descendant, but we do need to do a little bit more testing to figure that out. On paper, shields sound nice. They regen over time instead of requiring a health pickup, but to focus on shields you need a lot more specialization, because you need to factor in things like recharge time, recharge rate, and overall capacity. Plus, most characters have lower base shields, so they scale worse with mods. Not to mention that the max shield stat that you get from external components is actually just lower than the max HP stat. Overall, most characters will see more benefit from building around HP and defense for survivability. Let's go back to our Bunny setup quickly. We've already got time distribution on for a little bit of bonus health, but let's add HP amplification. While this does cut our shield by a pretty significant amount, we're pulling a little extra health out of all of our components and base stats, and we're boosting our scaling over a mod like increased HP. You could run increased HP, it's personal preference I'd say, but these two mods alone boost our health by almost 3 times. We'll see the comparisons once we finish up on the survivability section. Next up, Spear and Shield or Increased Defense. Now this is personal preference. I think the bonus skill power from Spear and Shield more than makes up for the slight defense loss. I think with some good external components, this is more than enough to survive basically any content in the game, but if you find yourself struggling, feel free to tweak it. Anyway, if we wanted to convert this into a bossing build, we'd take out one of our upcoming damage modules in place of an antibody resistance mod. And this is based on whatever boss you're planning on taking down. From some early testing, the antibody mods and elemental resistances are really strong, but I'd only recommend taking them for bossing because most enemy factions use a range of damage types, whereas bosses use 1 or 2, including physical. Now, let's do some comparison between Bunny's base stats and her stats with these basic survivability and uptime mods. Now, as you can see, these numbers are just infinitely higher. Having good survivability at the core of your build makes a world of difference. Only having one mod might be okay on some characters like Ajax, but I really think that having 2 or 3 mods dedicated purely to just staying alive is the perfect ground for any build. Unless, of course, you're taking down bosses in 30 seconds or doing a hyper-optimized speed build where you're just never getting hit. In that case, go all out on the damage and the utility and all of that. But for now, on this basic build, let's add some damage and range scaling. This build and this bunny right now only have an energy activator. There's no crystallization catalysts, so it's pretty bare bones in terms of cost, and it can be made even better by using some extra mods if we had the space. Here, the 2 extra mods that I've opted for to maximize this build while staying cheap are Technician and Skill Expansion. Technician gives us a little bit more damage, pushing our lightning emission into the one-shot range for most enemies at level 100, and Skill Expansion just boosts our kill range up by a huge amount. When adding range to your Descendant, one thing you gotta look out for is the maximum effective increased range. Now, on most skills, this is between 200 and 300%, and that starts from the baseline of 100 at, like, normal. Now, before we jump into some testing, let's look at the optimal external components. I don't have the optimal external components for Bunny, but we can still talk about them. Set bonuses aside, we're looking exclusively for components that add to the stats that we're trying to boost. Because components give flat increases, they scale with our mods, so a component that gives 400 health would actually give us closer to 1200 because of our mod scaling values. If we use a component that gives us max shield, we're actually losing some of that shield due to HP amplification. Most of your flat stats and stat increases will come from these external components. If you can turn your character's base flat health from 400 to 1600, the effectiveness of your HP mods increases by 4 times, and the same goes for defense and shields. That's because most mods affect the flat values, so if you're adding 400 health here and 400 health here, that means that the mod will be working with a larger base pool to increase by a set percentage. One more thing quickly, I want to talk about how currently a few of the mod displays are bugged and won't visually add stats. The battle branch of mods, so focus on X, the X specialist mods, they don't add skill power percentage to your skill previews, but they do work in damage calculations. So let's take this into some quick content to show it off. This is some standard level 100 mission grinding, nothing too special here. Alright, just a quick note about Bunny specifically. Her ultimate form has a unique mod called High Voltage that converts lightning emission into a targeted attack on up to 3 nearby enemies. Now this boosts the damage exponentially and it makes it a boss killing machine. Once I grind out Ultimate Bunny, I'm going to do a full in-depth build analysis and breakdown, so don't forget to subscribe for that one. So with only an energy activator, we've constructed 2 builds for Bunny that take advantage of her strengths entirely, giving us cheap mobbing and bossing setups. We know how to maximize her strengths and maximize her generally low survivability so that when we add crystallization catalysts going forward, we can make the builds even better. Next up, let's look at our possibilities with the bare minimum. We're talking about a max Descendant with no energy activator or crystallization catalyst. We're going to be using Enzo for this, who has pretty average survivability, slightly higher than average shields, and middle of the pack HP. We're looking to ignore the damage capabilities from Enzo's kit here, they just don't have high enough base values to be usable really. We're mainly going to stick with enhancing his ammo generation and survivability for a more gunplay oriented playstyle. In the closest example to the First Descendant Warframe, you have 2 real types of Warframes, casters and weapon platforms. Caster frames get most of their utility from spamming abilities, usually to clear rooms or buff allies. Weapon platform frames tend to err towards optimizing weapons through damage boosts and maybe some light crowd control. Enzo is a pretty perfect example of a weapon platform, along with Glay. These 2 characters pretty much perfectly embody the style of gameplay where you want to amp up weapon damage as much as possible. First up, we would be using Enzo's mod Reinforced Frontline that converts his shield drone into a firearm attack boost drone, if I was lucky enough to have it, that is. But for the moment we'll deduct 6 mod energy from our total anyways as to simulate it. After this, let's get some minor survivability boosts with HP amplification and time distribution. Range and power both mean very little here to Enzo. We really want to maximize our ability uptime by any means necessary to try and hoard as much high power ammo as possible. Duration and cooldown is the name of the game here, and with our limited mod slots, we want to make the most out of it. So we're going to add skill extension and nimble fingers, and now we're getting close to our limit. This is more than enough to clear most content, besides maybe some of the endgame Colossus fights. This build alone, combined with some really good high-end ammo weapons, trivializes farming. I'm pairing this build with Vestigial Organ and Smithereens, which both have great base ammo efficiency and they're spec'd individually for reload speed and crit respectively. Now here's this Enzo build in action. It's the same style of content at level 100, just normal farming missions. As we can see, this works. It's got zero investment and only a good strong baseline and great survivability. We can of course optimize this further with the aforementioned reinforced frontline and some even more cooldown, duration and defense, but that's if I wanted to use an energy activator and crystallization catalyst. Now that we've established the basics of build crafting and figured out how to squeeze the most out of a character's kit, let's quickly discuss where each stat lines up in terms of priority. Number 1, survivability. HP, defense, and shield in that order. For most characters, of course, HP is the most important stat because shields are hard to work around and they're expensive. We don't want to focus on them. Number 2, for bossing specifically, an antibody mod. Elemental resist is super strong and will carry our survivability in boss fights to a whole new level. Number 3, tempo mods. These are our MP restoring, our duration and cooldown mods. These establish and enhance a tempo or rhythm for ability uptime. Number 4, damage and optimization. Once you can reliably stay alive and keep your abilities rolling efficiently, then you can start stacking damage and extras to speed up your clear speed. Now that we've covered modding and external components, let's talk about some special interactions with reactors that I want to cover. Ultimate reactors. They give a 1.6 times skill power boost if you're holding the matching weapon. There's a little bit of confusion regarding this. You can't just have the weapon equipped. It needs to be in your hands at the time of skill cast to gain the bonus. This isn't a problem on characters like Bunny, where your lightning emission is active for nearing 30 seconds, but it can be rough on characters like Blair or Freyna, where you're constantly spamming abilities out. Now, you don't need to hold the weapon out while the ability is active to gain the bonus, only when it's cast. This means that you can swap to the correct weapon, use an ability, and swap back. Now this system is different to rare reactors, where they specifically state that it only needs to be equipped, meaning that if you're planning on weapon swapping a lot, you need to keep your skill rotation in mind if you're using an ultimate reactor. Alright, so that's pretty much everything in regards to the build crafting process for Descendants that I wanted to share today. Once we get more info about defense and how that turns into damage resistance, I'll make another video exploring that. But for the time being, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.